What did you just do? The slap echoed through the quiet mansion like a gunshot. Catherine Edwards stood frozen, her hand still stinging, the look of shock etched across her face. Her breath was heavy, her heart racing, as her eyes locked on Ava Miller, the woman who had worked for them for 2 years. Ava stood still, her cheek already beginning to turn red from the force of the blow. But there was no anger in her eyes, just calm, a resignation that Catherine couldn't quite understand. Catherine's voice broke through the tense silence, sharp and accusatory. You dared to touch my daughter. She gestured toward Emily, the 5-year-old girl sitting in the corner of the room, clutching her stuffed bunny. Ava didn't flinch, didn't speak a word. Instead, she slowly set Emily down in her crib, her movements gentle and methodical, like she had done countless times before. She was upset, Ava whispered softly, I was just calming her. But Catherine wasn't hearing it. No, she snapped, stepping forward, her eyes wide with fury. You have no right to touch my child. You are not family. Ava opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. Catherine's glare cut through her, the weight of years of unspoken tension pressing down on them both. Ava slowly turned away, not wanting to meet her employer's gaze, not wanting to add more fuel to the fire. The air hung heavy, thick with the tension of something unsaid. That's when Robert entered. What's going on? His voice was steady, calm, but there was an edge to it, a question that needed answering. Catherine spun to face him, still seething, but before she could speak, Robert's eyes darted between his wife and Ava, piecing the situation together in an instant. Catherine. He said her name quietly, almost in disbelief. Did you just hit her? Catherine's jaw clenched, but she didn't back down. She touched Emily, Robert. She overstepped. Ava didn't say a word, standing there with her back turned, facing the crib, her hands folded tightly in front of her. Robert stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. He didn't look at Ava. Instead, his gaze locked on Catherine, as if searching for something deeper. Something more. Catherine, this doesn't look right, he said, his tone now sharper, his patience fraying. Catherine's breath caught, and for a split second, she hesitated. She could feel his disappointment, and something more. A quiet accusation. She opened her mouth to protest, but Robert was already moving. He took out his phone, not even looking at Catherine, and dialed a number. A few moments later, the thud of the door closing behind him echoed in the silence. Robert's mind raced as he sat in his study, watching the muted news on the screen, the words on the teleprompter blurring in and out of focus. His thoughts were miles away, spinning with the events of the last few hours. He had barely spoken to Catherine since their argument, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something deeper than just a misunderstanding. A knock at the door broke his trance. It was his assistant. Mr. Edwards, the investigator is here, she said, her voice crisp and formal. Robert nodded, standing up to greet the man. He had hired a private investigator to look into Ava's past. He needed answers. The investigator, a man in his late 40s with a sharp suit and even sharper gaze, stepped into the room. His name was Jack, and he didn't waste time with pleasantries. Mr. Edwards, Jack began, sitting down across from him, I've done a full background check on Ava Miller, like you asked. Robert leaned forward, his fingers steepled. And? Jack opened a folder and slid it across the table. She's not who you think she is. Robert's brow furrowed. What do you mean? She's highly educated. Top of her class at Stanford. She worked at a prominent nonprofit organization for several years before taking a leave of absence about 2 years ago. Her focus was on child psychology, specifically working with trauma survivors. She even taught at a college for a while. Robert's jaw tightened. So she's not just a housekeeper. Jack shook his head. Far from it. Her past is impressive, but she also has some personal history. About a year ago, her young son died in a tragic accident. It was a car accident, and it appears it was completely avoidable. She had a breakdown after that, and everything she built crumbled. Robert let out a deep breath, running his hand through his hair. This was not the answer he expected. His mind was racing with 1,000 questions. Anything else? Jack hesitated. There's more, but it's sensitive. Ava's connections to certain people in the organization, they weren't all good. There are rumors that she might have had a deeper connection to some of the children she helped. Her professional boundaries were complicated. Robert sat back, stunned. What do you mean, complicated? I'm not sure yet, Jack said, closing the folder. But something doesn't sit right with the way she left everything behind. I'll keep digging. Robert nodded, his mind swirling. He needed to know more. But one thing was certain, Ava was hiding something. The person he thought he knew was not the person she really was. Robert spent the next few days in a fog. His thoughts kept returning to the image of Ava, standing still in the nursery, her face unreadable after Catherine slapped her. The calmness, the control, it was unsettling. He couldn't reconcile the kind, soft-spoken woman who cared for Emily with the woman Jack had described. So, Robert did the only thing he could think of, he reviewed the security footage from the house. He asked the security team to send him a copy of the footage from the nursery. What he saw next made his blood run cold. The video showed Ava, as she had said, soothing Emily in her crib. But there was something more, something in her movements. She wasn't just caring for Emily as a nanny would. There was a tenderness, a calmness, a familiarity that was unmistakable. She spoke to Emily in a way that no stranger could, comforting her as if she had done it 1,000 times before. Robert paused the video, his heart pounding. It wasn't just professional care. Ava had become something more to Emily, something deeper. But why? And why hadn't he seen it? His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock on his door. Catherine stepped inside, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Robert, she said, her voice shaky, we need to talk. He stood, suddenly feeling the weight of everything crashing down. What is it, Catherine? She walked over to him, her gaze meeting his. There was no anger, no bitterness. Just exhaustion and regret. I'm sorry, she whispered. I've been afraid. I'm afraid of losing Emily. I thought Ava was trying to take my place, but I see now. I see now that it wasn't like that. Robert didn't know what to say. For a moment, he just stared at her, unsure of how to respond. The apology seemed genuine, but was it too little, too late? Catherine wiped her eyes. I don't know what's wrong with me, Robert. I didn't want to admit it, but there's more to Ava than I've ever let myself see. And I need to know the truth. We both do. He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I'm looking into it, Catherine. I'm trying to understand her, but there's a lot more to this than we thought. Catherine nodded. I want to know everything. All of it. A few days later, Robert invited Ava into his study. He had already spoken to her once since the incident, but he needed more answers. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew that this conversation was crucial. Ava entered quietly, her posture tense. She had a dignified presence, one that made Robert question how he could have ever underestimated her. Ava, he began, I've been looking into your past. And I need you to be honest with me. What's going on? She didn't flinch. Instead, she sat across from him, her hands folded neatly on the desk. I'm not hiding anything from you, Mr. Edwards. But there are things in my past that I don't talk about. Things I thought I left behind. Robert leaned forward. This isn't about your past. It's about Emily. Why do you act like you're more than just a nanny to her? Ava's face softened, and for a moment, Robert could see the cracks in her calm exterior. Because I am. I care about her. More than anything. I lost a child once, Mr. Edwards. I know what it's like to love someone more than you can bear, and then have them taken from you. Robert felt a pang of guilt in his chest. He had no idea about the depth of Ava's loss. But why stay here, he asked. Why put yourself in this situation? Ava took a deep breath. Because I didn't know how else to heal. When I saw Emily, I saw something in her, something I couldn't let go of. And I couldn't walk away. Robert sat in stunned silence. This wasn't just about a job for Ava. It was about something far more personal, something deeper than he could understand. I'm not here to replace anyone, she continued softly. But I can't ignore what Emily means to me. And I won't apologize for it. Robert's mind raced, the weight of his next decision bearing down on him. He could feel the shifting balance in the room, the heavy air that threatened to suffocate them both. The truth was out. But now, everything was different. The next few days in the Edwards household were a whirlwind. Catherine and Robert had barely spoken, their once harmonious relationship now strained by the revelations about Ava. Catherine spent most of her time in her room, avoiding her husband, while Robert found himself replaying the conversations in his head, questioning everything. Ava continued with her duties, but there was an unmistakable shift in her demeanor. She was more distant, yet there was a quiet strength about her, a calmness that made Robert uneasy. What did she truly want? And why was she still here, so deeply involved in their lives? One afternoon, Robert sat in the living room, staring at the fire. It had been a week since their confrontation, and the weight of the secrets he had uncovered felt heavier with each passing day. He could no longer ignore the connection between Ava and Emily, it was undeniable. Catherine walked in quietly, her presence barely noticeable. We need to talk, she said, her voice soft but firm. Robert looked up, his eyes tired but focused. About what? About Ava, Catherine replied. She sat down beside him, her body language stiff. I've been thinking a lot, Robert. I was wrong. I didn't see it before, but now I do. I was afraid, of losing Emily, of losing my role in her life. But Ava, she's not the enemy. She's not trying to take anything away from me. Robert exhaled, relieved but still unsure. So, what do we do now? Catherine looked at him, her expression conflicted. I don't know. But we can't keep ignoring what's right in front of us. Ava cares about Emily, more than I thought possible. And I think she's been trying to protect us in her own way. Robert ran a hand through his hair. It's not that simple, Catherine. She's got a past we still don't fully understand. There's too much about her we haven't uncovered yet. Catherine's voice faltered. Then let's uncover it. Together. For Emily. Catherine and Robert agreed to meet with Ava together, no longer avoiding the inevitable. They needed answers, and it was time to lay everything out on the table. The three of them sat across from each other in the living room, the air thick with tension. Ava's hands rested on her lap, her eyes lowered, almost as if she were bracing herself for the confrontation. We need to know everything, Robert began, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. No more secrets, Ava. We've all been living with too much uncertainty. Ava took a slow breath, her shoulders tensing. I never wanted to hurt any of you, she said quietly. I came here to heal, not to disrupt your lives. Catherine's gaze softened slightly. Ava, we know about your son. We know about your past. But we need to understand why you've become so involved with Emily. You've crossed boundaries, and it's not just about being a nanny anymore. It's personal. Ava's eyes flickered with something unreadable, a shadow passing over her expression. She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. When I lost my son, I thought I would never be able to care for anyone again. But when I saw Emily, when I saw how fragile she was, how much she needed someone to lean on, I couldn't walk away. I didn't want to, not after everything I've been through. I saw something in her that reminded me of the child I lost, and I couldn't let go of her. Robert and Catherine exchanged a glance, the weight of her words sinking in. But there was still more that needed to be said. "Why didn't you tell us this?" Catherine asked, her voice quieter now, tinged with sorrow. "Why did you keep all of this inside?" Ava's voice broke as she replied, "Because I didn't know how. I didn't know how to explain that what I was doing wasn't about replacing anyone. It was about finding healing, for both me and for Emily. But I couldn't risk you thinking I was trying to take something from you. I didn't want to lose my job, or worse, lose your trust." A silence stretched between them. Robert felt the tension in the room shift, the bitterness slowly giving way to something more fragile, understanding. The following days brought a subtle shift in the house. Catherine and Robert continued to struggle with the revelation about Ava's attachment to Emily, but they both made a conscious effort to ease the tension. They started to see Ava through different eyes, but the question still lingered: how much of this attachment was truly about care, and how much was about something else? Robert decided to investigate further, diving deeper into Ava's past. The private investigator had mentioned more than just the tragic loss of her son. There were still unresolved issues regarding her departure from her non-profit work, what had driven her to leave everything behind. He sat at his desk, his laptop open, the research in front of him. It wasn't long before he found a shocking detail buried in the records. Ava had been involved in a legal dispute with a former colleague, someone who had accused her of crossing professional boundaries with a vulnerable child. The case had been settled quietly, with no public fallout. It seemed like a small, isolated incident, but for Robert, it was a red flag. He needed to confront Ava again. That evening, Robert sat across from her in the study. "Ava, we need to talk about something I found," he said, his voice steady but filled with concern. Ava's face paled as she met his gaze. "What did you find?" "Your past with the non-profit," Robert replied. "There was an incident, a legal dispute. I need you to explain it to me." Ava's shoulders slumped, her eyes brimming with emotion. She didn't try to deny it. "It was a mistake," she said quietly. "I was too involved, too invested. I had to step back from my work after that. But I never wanted it to affect my life here. And I never meant for it to affect Emily." Robert didn't know how to respond. This new information complicated everything. He needed time to process it, to understand how it all fit together. As the days wore on, the tension in the house was palpable. Robert and Catherine continued to work through their feelings about Ava, but there were still so many unanswered questions. Ava's presence in their home was becoming both a blessing and a burden, a reminder of the deep emotional connections that had formed, but also of the unresolved issues that threatened to tear them apart. One night, as Robert lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, he felt a pang of guilt. He had to make a decision, not just about Ava, but about his family. If they were going to move forward, they needed to do it together. No more secrets, no more hidden motives. The next day, Robert called Ava into the study once more. "Ava," he began, his voice soft but firm, "we've been through a lot, and I think it's time to clear the air once and for all. I need to know if you're truly here for the right reasons. Are you here to be a part of this family, or are you still running from your past?" Ava met his gaze, her eyes full of regret and sincerity. "I'm here because I care about Emily. And because I want to find peace with myself. But I'm not running anymore. I'm ready to face whatever comes next." Robert nodded, his mind made up. "Then it's time for us to move forward. Together. As a family." The days after their conversation in the study were difficult. Robert and Catherine had begun the slow process of rebuilding their trust, but there was still a palpable distance between them. Catherine's apology had been genuine, but the weight of her earlier actions lingered. And Ava, despite her sincerity, remained a constant reminder of everything they were still grappling with. It was clear that things couldn't go back to the way they were before. But could they move forward? One morning, as Robert sat at the kitchen table, his fingers tapping nervously against his coffee mug, he couldn't help but reflect on everything that had transpired. There was still a nagging feeling in his gut that something was off. Ava had become more than just a caretaker to Emily. But what did that mean for their family? And why, despite everything, did he feel like he was losing control of a situation he should have managed better? Catherine entered the room, her eyes puffy from a restless night. She sat down opposite him, her gaze shifting between him and the floor. "We need to make a decision," Catherine said, breaking the silence. Robert looked at her, sensing the weight of the conversation. "What decision?" "About Ava," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "I think it's time to decide if we want her to stay. If we're going to move on, we need to make it clear to her, and to ourselves, that she's either part of this family or she's not." Robert didn't answer right away. Instead, he ran his hand through his hair and leaned back in his chair. It was a tough call. He couldn't ignore the deep bond Ava had formed with Emily. But was it too much? Too fast? Was this healthy for Emily? For them? "I know what you're thinking," Catherine continued. "But I want you to understand, Robert. Ava has given Emily something I never could. And maybe I've been wrong to resist that." Robert looked up, meeting her gaze. "But how do we know if this is healthy? What if it's crossing boundaries?" Catherine's eyes softened. "We won't know unless we try. But I'm willing to try, Robert. I want to fix things with you. With Ava. For Emily." It was the first time in weeks that Robert felt a sense of relief. Catherine was finally speaking with conviction, not just fear. He realized that he didn't want to lose what they had, and maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to make this work. Later that evening, Robert and Catherine sat down with Ava in the living room. The tension was palpable, but this was it, they needed to have the conversation that would define the future of their family. Ava entered quietly, her face still bearing the soft marks of sadness from the past week. She had clearly been giving the situation a lot of thought, but Robert couldn't help but notice the weariness in her eyes. She had been through so much already, but now was the time for her to speak the truth, whatever that truth was. "Ava," Robert began, his voice steady, "we've talked. And we both feel like it's time to make a decision." Ava's breath hitched slightly, but she remained composed, sitting with her hands folded in her lap. Catherine leaned forward. "We can't keep living in uncertainty, Ava. It's time to figure out where we stand with you." Ava nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I understand. I never meant to make things complicated. But I can't pretend anymore. I care for Emily in a way that goes beyond just a job. I don't want to walk away from her. But I also understand if you feel that I've crossed a line." Catherine felt a lump form in her throat. She had feared this moment, the moment when Ava might choose to leave. But she also knew it was important to give Ava the space to express herself. "You're not just a nanny to Emily, Ava," Robert said, his voice softening. "And I know it's not easy for you. But you've built a connection with her, one that's hard to ignore. We need to figure out how to manage that, as a family." Ava's eyes filled with emotion, but she nodded in understanding. "I don't want to cause any more pain. I just want to help her heal. She's been through so much. And I've been through my own battles, too. I guess. I was hoping that in helping her, I could help myself." Catherine and Robert exchanged a look. It wasn't an easy decision, but Ava's words struck a chord with both of them. Ava wasn't just some outsider. She was someone who had been through her own trauma, and in her own way, she had become a lifeline to their daughter. Finally, Robert spoke again. "We're not asking you to leave, Ava. But we need to understand the boundaries. We can't have any more confusion. If we're going to move forward, we all need to be on the same page." Ava's eyes brightened with a small, grateful smile. "I'm ready. I've never wanted to overstep. But I want to stay. For Emily. For both of you." Catherine let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Then let's make this work. Let's do it together. Days turned into weeks, and the Edwards family began to rebuild their fragile bond. The tension that had once dominated the house began to lift, but there was still a long road ahead. Ava, Catherine, and Robert started to set clear boundaries, finding a way to work together for Emily's sake. Catherine began attending therapy to work through her insecurities, while Robert tried to better understand his role as a father and husband in the midst of these new dynamics. As for Ava, she continued her role as Emily's caretaker but with a renewed sense of respect for the family. She had been given a second chance, and she wasn't about to waste it. But there were still moments of uncertainty. Quiet conversations between Robert and Catherine at night, wondering if they were truly doing the right thing. Were they letting go of their fears? Or were they just avoiding them? Still, there was hope. And with that hope came a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. Months passed, and slowly but surely, things began to settle. The Edwards family wasn't perfect, far from it. But they had found a way to coexist, to build new trust, and to create an environment where Emily could thrive. Ava remained a part of their lives, not as a servant, but as an equal. She had become more than just a nanny. She was a mentor, a guide, and for Emily, a second mother. One afternoon, as Robert watched Emily and Ava laughing together in the backyard, he realized how far they had come. This was their new reality, and while it hadn't been easy, it was theirs. Catherine stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She didn't need to say anything. The peace between them was all that needed to be said. Despite the surface calm in the Edwards household, there was an undercurrent of tension that no one could ignore. It had been weeks since they had all agreed to move forward together, but trust, even after the most heartfelt discussions, didn't come overnight. Catherine had been working hard on herself, attending therapy sessions and facing the insecurities she'd buried for years. Robert, too, had his own set of struggles. Being the man who had to keep everything together, his burden wasn't light. He constantly questioned whether he was doing the right thing by allowing Ava to remain so involved with Emily. What was the right balance between nurturing and overstepping? One morning, Robert sat in his office, flipping through paperwork when he heard the sound of soft laughter coming from the living room. It was a sound he hadn't heard much in recent weeks, the laughter of Emily and Ava. But something about it unsettled him. He stood up, walked into the living room, and froze at the sight before him. Ava and Emily were sitting on the floor, reading a book together. There was a connection between them that was undeniable. Ava's hand gently brushed through Emily's hair as the little girl pointed at the pictures, her eyes wide with curiosity. Robert stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them, the knot in his stomach tightening. Something about it felt too natural. Too comfortable. Was it possible that Ava had become more than just a caretaker to Emily? Was this crossing a line? Catherine entered the room behind him, noticing his tense posture. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Robert didn't turn to face her, his eyes still fixed on the scene in front of him. "This," he said simply, "doesn't feel right." Catherine sighed, her eyes following his gaze. "I get it. But Ava isn't just a nanny anymore, Robert. She's been there for Emily when no one else was. She's given Emily something I couldn't. And I'm starting to realize. I have to accept that." The next day, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that something more was going on. There was a hidden depth to Ava's connection with Emily that went beyond what he had originally thought. It was more than just care. It was something that struck at his deepest fears. He decided to confront Ava, not out of anger, but out of a desperate need for clarity. He asked her to meet him in his study. When Ava arrived, she looked more composed than he felt. She had always been calm, no matter the situation, but this time, Robert saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "Ava," Robert started, his voice steady but filled with an edge of concern, "we need to talk. I've been thinking about everything, about you, about Emily, about our family." Ava nodded, her hands clasped in her lap. I understand, Mr. Edwards. I know I've become too much a part of your lives. But I never meant to cross any boundaries. Robert's voice grew more urgent. But you have, Ava. You've become more than just a caretaker to Emily. It feels like you've become, like a second mother to her. And I'm not sure if that's healthy for her or for us. Ava's face softened, and for the first time, Robert saw a crack in her usual composure. I never wanted to take anyone's place, Mr. Edwards. But when I saw Emily, I saw my own grief reflected in her. I lost a child, and in a way, Emily gave me a second chance to love again. I didn't know how to deal with that, I just wanted to protect her. Robert's heart tightened. He hadn't realized the depth of Ava's loss, nor the weight it carried with her. But her words didn't change the fact that their lives were tangled in ways that he wasn't sure they could untangle. Ava, I'm not angry with you. I just need to understand your intentions. Are you staying because you feel like you found a home here, or because you feel like Emily is your chance to heal? Ava was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant as she processed his words. I'm staying because I care about her, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I also need to heal, Mr. Edwards. I can't pretend that I don't feel something for her. But it's not about replacing anyone. It's about finding something I thought I'd lost. Robert stood there, conflicted, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Ava wasn't just a nanny. She was a woman with her own history, her own pain, and her own need to connect. But how did that fit into their family? How did they balance everything, the love she had for Emily, the care she had provided, and the boundaries they all needed to set? I need time to think about this, Robert said, his voice strained. This isn't something I can just accept without understanding the full picture. Ava nodded. I understand. I'm not asking you to accept it right away. I just want you to know that I never wanted to hurt you or Catherine. I want what's best for Emily. Always. The next few days were filled with awkward silence. Robert had distanced himself from Ava and Catherine, unsure of how to navigate the tension that hung in the air. Catherine, too, seemed torn between the growing attachment between Emily and Ava and her own fears of being replaced. Catherine decided to take matters into her own hands. She scheduled a family therapy session, something Robert had hesitated to do, but something that seemed like the only way forward. The therapist, a calm and understanding woman named Dr. Lawrence, guided them through the session. It's clear that emotions are running high, Dr. Lawrence began. But if you're going to heal, you need to start being honest, with yourselves, and with each other. Catherine was the first to speak. I don't know what to do anymore. Ava has become so much more than just a nanny. I'm afraid that I'll lose Emily. I don't know how to make sense of it. Dr. Lawrence nodded. It's understandable to feel that way. But you can't control Emily's relationships. What you can control is your response to them. You can't push Ava away, but you also need to set boundaries that make sense for your family. Robert added, I'm struggling to understand why Ava has become so involved with Emily. It's like she's become a second mother to her, and that scares me. I don't want to lose control over what happens in this house. Dr. Lawrence turned to him. Robert, this isn't about control. It's about trust. You've been avoiding the reality of Ava's attachment because it makes you uncomfortable. But avoiding it isn't going to solve the problem. It's time to face it head-on. Over the next few weeks, Robert, Catherine, and Ava began to slowly rebuild their relationships. There was no magic fix, no immediate solution. But through therapy and open communication, they started to find a balance. Ava remained in the household, but her role had shifted. She wasn't just a caregiver anymore, she was part of their extended family. She still had boundaries, and Catherine and Robert were more aware of the delicate lines that needed to be drawn. But for the first time in months, there was a sense of understanding between them. One evening, as Robert sat on the porch watching the sunset, Catherine joined him, a warm cup of tea in her hand. You're quiet, she remarked, sitting beside him. I'm thinking about how far we've come, he said, a smile tugging at his lips. I didn't think we'd ever get here, but maybe this is the start of something better. Catherine smiled softly, her hand resting on his. Maybe. But we can't stop trying, Robert. We have to keep working for it. For Emily. For us. They sat in silence, the weight of the past finally easing, replaced by a cautious hope for the future. The weeks that followed the therapy session marked a turning point in the Edwards household. Robert and Catherine were actively trying to adjust to the new family dynamic with Ava. While the tension from earlier had dissipated, there was a noticeable shift in the way they interacted. They were all trying to make it work, but it was clear that old habits were hard to break. One morning, Robert and Catherine were sitting in the kitchen, sipping their coffee. The house was quiet, too quiet, almost. Emily was upstairs playing with her toys, and Ava had already gone out for a morning walk. I think we need to have a conversation with Emily, Robert said, setting his mug down. About everything. Catherine nodded, her expression serious. You're right. She's been through a lot, and we've tried to shelter her from the chaos. But we can't avoid it forever. She's old enough to understand that things are different now. Robert sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I'm not sure how to even begin that conversation. How do we explain this new reality to her without scaring her? Catherine reached across the table, taking his hand. We tell her the truth. In a way she can understand. We're all still figuring this out, but we're in this together. It's not going to be easy, but we owe it to her. Robert hesitated. I just don't want her to feel like she's being torn between us. She's already lost so much. I don't want her to think she has to choose. Catherine's voice softened. I don't think she will. We've all been through this together. She'll be okay, Robert. We just need to show her that we're not giving up on each other. Later that evening, Robert and Catherine sat down with Emily in the living room. Ava was out for the evening, and they figured it was the best time to have this conversation. Emily, Robert began gently, we need to talk to you about some things. Emily looked up at her parents, her small brow furrowing in confusion. What kind of things? Catherine smiled softly. Nothing to be worried about, sweetie. We just want you to know that things have changed a little in our house. Robert and Catherine exchanged a glance, both of them knowing how delicate this conversation was. Emily had been through so much in the past few months, and they wanted to ensure she didn't feel burdened by it. Do you remember how we talked about Ava? Catherine asked. Emily nodded, her fingers playing with the edge of her shirt. She takes care of me, right? Robert's heart warmed at her simple response. That's right, honey. Ava's here to help, just like she always has been. But there are some things we need to make clear. Catherine continued, Ava is going to be around a lot, but we want you to know that no one will ever replace your mom or dad. We all love you, and we're here to take care of you, together. Ava's just a part of our family now, and we're working together to make sure you feel safe and happy. Emily's eyes lit up as she nodded, her confusion fading into understanding. So. Ava's like family? Robert smiled. Yes, she is. But that doesn't change the love we all have for you. We're still your mom and dad. Catherine leaned down and hugged Emily tightly. We're in this together, sweetheart. We promise. Emily hugged them back, and for the first time in weeks, the heaviness that had weighed on the family seemed to lift. There were still challenges ahead, but for now, they had taken the first step toward healing. As Robert and Catherine worked to strengthen their family, there was still one lingering question: could they ever fully accept Ava's place in their lives? Ava had become more than just an employee. She was part of their world now, but the question remained, was that the right decision? One afternoon, as the family gathered for lunch, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't truly confronted everything yet. There were still unresolved issues from Ava's past that hung in the air. Catherine, Robert began, setting his napkin down, there's something we need to talk about. It's about Ava. Catherine looked up from her plate, sensing the shift in his tone. What do you mean? Ava's past, we still don't know everything, Robert said, his voice heavy. I've been thinking about it. We've talked about her attachment to Emily, but I think there's more we need to understand. There are parts of her life she's still keeping from us. Catherine's brow furrowed. What do you mean? I thought we were past all of that. I don't think we are, Robert said, his voice tight. There's something about the way she's involved with Emily that makes me uneasy. It's not just about taking care of her, it's deeper than that. I don't know what it is, but I feel like we haven't really understood what's going on. Catherine sat back in her chair, her mind racing. Robert, we've been through so much already. Do we really need to go digging into her past again? I just want things to be normal. I know, Robert said, but this isn't about Ava anymore. It's about us. We can't move forward if we don't face the truth. Catherine sighed deeply. I agree. But how do we even start? What do we do now? Robert paused, running a hand through his hair. I think we need to talk to her. Ask the questions we've been avoiding. Only then can we really move forward. That evening, Robert and Catherine invited Ava to sit down with them in the study. The air was thick with anticipation. This was the conversation they had been avoiding, and they both knew it was time to face the uncomfortable truth. Ava sat down in front of them, her posture tense but composed. I know something's bothering you both, she said quietly. What is it? Robert took a deep breath. Ava, we've been thinking. There's more to your past that we don't know about. You've been so open with us about your loss, and we appreciate that, but there are still things that don't add up. You've been holding back. Ava's eyes widened, her body stiffening as she prepared herself. I've told you everything I think you need to know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What else is there? Catherine spoke next, her voice softer but firm. We need to know if there's something we're missing. We need to understand everything, for Emily, for all of us. Ava remained silent for a long moment, the weight of their words settling in. Finally, she spoke. There's something I've been hiding. Something I've never been able to talk about. I was involved in a case at the nonprofit. It was about a child I had grown close to, and when the system took him away, I didn't know how to handle it. I made a mistake. It nearly cost me everything. Robert and Catherine exchanged glances, the realization hitting them hard. This was the piece of the puzzle they had been missing. Ava's attachment to Emily wasn't just about a desire to help, it was tied to her own unresolved grief and trauma. The weight of the silence in the study hung heavy. Ava's confession, though not entirely unexpected, was still a shock to Robert and Catherine. They had spent weeks trying to rebuild their trust, trying to find some semblance of normalcy, but Ava's past, the part of it she had kept hidden, was too deep to ignore. I didn't want you to know, Ava whispered, her eyes downcast. I thought if I could just move on, if I could just focus on Emily, it wouldn't matter anymore. But it does, doesn't it? Catherine's heart ached as she looked at Ava, her eyes brimming with a mix of empathy and confusion. She knew Ava's pain, but this was something different. It was a break in the foundation they had been trying to build together. What happened? Robert asked softly, his voice more cautious now. What exactly went wrong with the child you were working with? Ava took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. I became too attached. I didn't know how to let go when they pulled him from the foster system. I wasn't supposed to get that close to him, but I did. And when they took him away, I broke. I couldn't handle it. I had to leave everything behind, my career, my life. It was a mess. Robert could feel the air thickening. He understood grief, but this wasn't just about losing a child. It was about the emotional boundaries that had been crossed, the professional lines that had blurred. Did you ever get help after that? Robert's voice was firm, but concerned. Ava nodded slowly, her eyes welling up. I tried, but it wasn't enough. When I came here, I thought I could bury it all. But when I saw Emily, I saw him in her. And that's when I couldn't stop myself. I knew I shouldn't have become so attached, but I did. I couldn't help it. Catherine's heart twisted with sympathy, but she also felt a rising fear. Ava's attachment to Emily wasn't just about care anymore, it was about something deeper, something unresolved. Ava, Catherine said softly, you have to understand. Emily's a child. She's not a substitute for your grief. I know, Ava said, tears now streaming down her face. I never meant to use her, but I was looking for something in her. Something to heal me. Robert sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Ava wasn't just an outsider in their lives. She had woven herself into the fabric of their family in ways that were hard to define. We can't keep doing this, Ava. You can't keep using Emily as a way to heal your own wounds. We can't let that happen. Ava nodded, wiping her eyes. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to get this far. I wanted to help Emily, but I see now that I've been the one needing help all along. Catherine placed a hand on Robert's arm, signaling him to pause. She knew this was a delicate moment, one that could either break them or give them a chance at healing. Ava, I think, we need some time to process this. All of us. We need to understand how we move forward, not just with Emily, but with you too. Ava's voice cracked as she spoke. I'll leave if that's what you think is best. I understand. I don't want to cause any more damage. Robert stood up, looking at Ava with a mixture of frustration and empathy. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we all need to understand the limits. We need to find a way for all of us to exist in this house without carrying the weight of the past. I don't know if we're there yet, but we need to get there, together. Ava nodded quietly, her eyes never leaving the floor. The next few days were filled with tension. There were no harsh words exchanged, but the unspoken divide between them lingered. Catherine and Robert had spent hours talking, trying to figure out how to move forward with Ava still in their lives. It was clear now that they could no longer pretend that everything was fine. The truth was out in the open, and they all needed to adjust to the new reality. Emily, unaware of the storm that had passed through her parents' lives, continued with her routines, blissfully innocent. She was playing in the garden with her toys, laughing with Ava as if nothing had changed. It was a stark contrast to the conversations taking place inside the house. Catherine and Robert watched her from the window, a sense of both relief and sadness washing over them. They were fighting to protect her, to make sure that the love they had for her wasn't tainted by the complex emotions surrounding Ava. We can't keep hiding this from her, Catherine said, breaking the silence between them. Robert sighed, running his hand through his hair. I know. But I don't want to cause her any more pain than she's already been through. She deserves to know what's going on. At some point, she's going to feel the tension, Catherine replied. Robert nodded slowly. We'll have to be careful. We'll have to explain everything, but in a way that she can understand. We've been through a lot, but this is going to be different. Several days passed, and with each one, Robert and Catherine grew more certain that they needed to address the larger issue. The family's dynamic had been fractured by the hidden truths, but it wasn't beyond repair. One evening, after Emily had gone to bed, Robert and Catherine sat together in the living room, the quiet hum of the house surrounding them. I think it's time, Robert said, his voice steady but filled with conviction. We need to set boundaries with Ava. We need to find a way to make sure this doesn't happen again, that Emily isn't dragged into something she's not equipped to understand. Catherine nodded, her hands folded in her lap. But she can't leave, Robert. She's part of our lives now. She's done too much for Emily to just walk away. Robert leaned back in his chair, thinking. We'll find a way to make it work. But we need to address the real issue. Ava needs to get the help she deserves. She needs to face her own healing. We can't carry her burdens for her. Catherine met his gaze. And if she's not ready to let go of her attachment to Emily? We'll figure it out, Robert said firmly. But we have to set the tone. We can't allow the past to hold us hostage. The following weeks were full of difficult decisions and emotional breakthroughs. Ava, recognizing the need for professional help, agreed to seek therapy on her own. Catherine and Robert continued with their own counseling, learning how to communicate better and rebuild their relationship without allowing the past to define their future. The most significant breakthrough came when Ava, after a few weeks of therapy, requested a final meeting with Robert and Catherine. She sat in front of them, more composed than before, her expression one of quiet determination. "I've learned a lot about myself," Ava began, her voice steady. "And I've realized that I can't keep using Emily to heal my own wounds. I've spent so long trying to fix what's broken in me that I lost sight of what was important, the boundaries I should have respected. I'm sorry for overstepping, for not knowing where the lines were." Catherine and Robert listened in silence, each of them sensing the change in Ava. This wasn't the same woman who had walked into their home so many months ago. She had begun to heal, and in doing so, she had started to let go of the pain that had driven her attachment to Emily. "We appreciate you taking responsibility for that, Ava," Robert said quietly. "We're not perfect either, but we've learned a lot too. We just need to make sure that moving forward, we all know where we stand." Ava nodded, a small but genuine smile on her face. "I understand. I want to be a part of this family, but I need to do it the right way. I'll respect the boundaries from now on." Catherine took Ava's hand in hers, squeezing it gently. "We're all in this together. And we'll figure it out." The weeks that followed Ava's decision to seek therapy marked a new chapter for the Edwards family. There was still an air of caution around the house, but it was different now. Things weren't as tense as they had been. The rawness of the past few months had started to fade, replaced with a sense of clarity. Still, there was work to be done, not just between Robert, Catherine, and Ava, but also within themselves. Robert had spent more time thinking about how much his family had been through. It wasn't just about trust anymore, it was about learning how to let go of the past and build something new, something stronger. He couldn't keep holding on to old fears. Catherine, too, had found a new sense of determination. Her therapy sessions had brought her face to face with deep-rooted insecurities, and she was finally ready to confront them. She was beginning to find her own voice in her marriage, not just as a mother or wife, but as an individual. One night, as the family sat down for dinner, the air was lighter than it had been in months. Emily laughed, her voice filled with joy as she recounted the events of her day. Ava, seated at the table with them, smiled softly, her hands folded in her lap. Robert glanced at Catherine, and they shared a quiet moment of understanding. This was their new normal, imperfect, but real. They had made it through the hardest part. Though the path to healing was far from over, the Edwards family had begun to redefine what it meant to be a family. Ava's place in their home had shifted. She was no longer just a caretaker, but a part of their lives, someone they trusted and cared for, though the boundaries remained clear. In therapy, Ava had made tremendous progress. She no longer saw Emily as a surrogate child, but as a person who deserved love, care, and space to grow. Robert and Catherine had also worked through their challenges, learning how to communicate better, how to trust each other, and most importantly, how to trust themselves. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Robert and Catherine sat on the porch. The sun had just set, and the sky was a soft blend of pinks and purples. The evening was calm, peaceful. Catherine took a deep breath and turned to Robert. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About everything we've been through. And I think I finally get it." Robert looked at her, his expression softening. "What do you mean?" "I spent so much time worrying about losing Emily," Catherine said quietly. "I didn't see how much I was losing myself. I had to let go of that fear. I had to trust that Emily would be okay. That we would be okay. Robert reached over and took her hand. And you know what? I'm starting to trust that, too. We're not perfect. But we've been through a lot, and we're still here. Catherine smiled, a weight lifting off her shoulders. I'm ready for what's next. And I think we've earned a second chance. It was a few days later when Ava, having made significant strides in therapy, asked to speak to Robert and Catherine. She seemed more at peace than she had in months, and there was a quiet strength in her demeanor that had been missing before. When they sat down together, Ava spoke softly, but with determination. I want to thank you both. I know this hasn't been easy for any of us. But I want you to know that I'm ready to step back. I realize now that I was too involved with Emily, and it wasn't fair to anyone. I'm going to continue with my therapy, and I'll respect the boundaries we've set as a family. Catherine and Robert exchanged a look. It was clear that Ava had come to terms with everything, and that this was her way of giving them the space they needed, the space they all needed. I think we can finally move forward, Robert said, his voice steady. We've all had our struggles, but we've come out of this stronger. Not just as a family, but as individuals. Catherine nodded, a smile tugging at her lips. It's been a long journey, but we're finally getting to a place where we understand each other. And that's what matters. Ava smiled, the weight of her past still there but no longer controlling her. I'm grateful for everything you've done for me. I'm ready to focus on myself now, and I'm ready to respect the boundaries we've agreed on. I want what's best for Emily. And for all of us. It had been months since that difficult conversation in the study. The Edwards family had faced more challenges than they ever thought possible, but they had learned and grown in ways that neither of them could have predicted. Ava, now attending therapy regularly, continued to be a presence in their lives, but with new clarity. She wasn't just a caretaker, she was an important part of Emily's world, and she had earned a place in the family. Robert and Catherine had found new understanding in their relationship. They had worked through their fears, their insecurities, and their doubts. They were no longer just partners, they were a team, stronger, more united than before. One evening, they sat in the living room, Emily curled up on the couch, reading her book. Ava sat nearby, watching her with a soft smile. Robert and Catherine exchanged a glance, their hearts full as they looked at their daughter, then back at each other. This was their new beginning. Not perfect, but real. And for the first time in a long time, they were truly at peace. Time passed, and the Edwards family continued to heal. Ava, now finding fulfillment in her own life, still played a role in Emily's upbringing but with new boundaries. Catherine and Robert had learned to trust each other again, and the bond they had been trying to rebuild had finally solidified. They had learned that healing isn't linear, and that forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, but learning to live with it and move forward. Each member of the family had their own journey, but together, they had found a new sense of purpose. And that, Robert realized as he sat on the porch one evening with Catherine, was all they needed. To heal, to grow, and to find strength in each other. They had finally become the family they were always meant to be.